This episode is brought to you by Sterling Soap Company. Fellas, you've heard the phrase, look good, feel good, right? But why not add smell good to that too? That's where Sterling Soap Company comes in. First, Sterling Soap is 100% natural and has a wide variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, and cologne. Second, there's a scent just for you. How about burgundy? Yeah, it's more than a color. The Sterling Soap folks blend natural essential oils with hints of mahogany, golden amber, and sandalwood. Or how about D503, an intensely masculine scent inspired by Legend by Mont Blanc. And third, you will feel good about the price. For just a little more than you'd pay at the grocery store, Sterling Soap will leave you feeling clean, refreshed, and ready for whatever's next. Give Sterling Soap a try today. Visit sterlingsoap.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Ossie Vitt was a terrific manager for the Cleveland Indians in 1938, 39, and 1940. He also spent 15 seasons in the minor leagues as a manager, and one of those seasons, 1937, with Newark in the International League, he and the Bears steamrolled everyone, winning 109 games and losing just 43 for a winning percentage of .717. The Indians, looking to overtake teams like the Tigers and Yankees, brought in Vitt hoping he could help the Tribe rise to the top of the American League standings. Vitt worked magic, but he rubbed some of the players the wrong way, and there was a revolt that led the team to being labeled as the Crybabies. And next, on Sports Forgotten Heroes, we'll take a look back at the managing career of Ossie Vitt and the Cleveland Crybabies.
This is Sports Forgotten Heroes, a tribute to the stars who shaped the games we love to watch and the games we love to play. Stars who provided us with many thrills, but when their time was up, they faded away. We'll take a look back at their spectacular careers, their moments of fame, even if it was just for one season or just one game. And now, here's your host, Warren Rogan.
Hello and welcome back to Sports Forgotten Heroes, episode number 161, Ossie Vitt and the Cleveland Crybabies. A few notes before we get into today's show. As you might have discovered, I have altered the release schedule of Sports Forgotten Heroes. Moving forward, Sports Forgotten Heroes will be on hiatus during the cold winter months of December, January, February, and March. If there's a special episode that needs to be released during those months, I will certainly work on that. You know, it takes a lot to research and produce every episode of Sports Forgotten Heroes, and the winter months give me that time. Plus, it also allows me time to work on writing books. My first book will be coming out later this summer, College All-Stars versus NFL Champions, the Chicago Charities Football Games, 1934 to 1976. This book is about the series of football games between a team of college football all-stars and the defending NFL and later Super Bowl champions. Every year from 1934 through 1976, this game was played in Chicago to launch the exhibition season. Again, that book will be available starting in August, and you can pre-order on Amazon now. If you'd like a signed copy, please send me an email to sportsfh.info@gmail.com. That's sportsfh.info@gmail.com. And we'll work out the details. Also, I'm just finishing up my second book about the great hockey defenseman Jim Nielsen, and I'll have more details about this book at a later date. As always, I thank you all for your support, and I'm very excited to bring you another season of Sports Forgotten Heroes, starting with this episode about former Cleveland Indians manager Ossie Vitt and his team, which was known as the Crybabies. Joining me on today's episode is a familiar guest, Gary Webster, who has a new book out, CRYBABY Rebellion. As always, Gary's research is impeccable, and he always makes for a great guest. So without further ado, let's jump into today's show with my guest, Gary Webster. Gary, welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes. I am thrilled that we are finally able to do an episode face to face.
Yes, the wonders of modern technology. I finally got a camera. We were supposed to do our last podcast via Zoom, and I discovered that it was hard to do a Zoomcast without a camera. So I invested in one, and now here we are talking face to face.
Yeah, and it's, as always, an interesting topic. You know, you are certainly an expert, a terrific sports historian when it comes to Cleveland. And, you know, we've done quite a few together, and you contributed to the book that I have coming out in June of 2026, College All-Stars versus the NFL Champions. And I want to thank you for contributing to that. But today, it's quite the topic. The Cleveland Crybabies. And no, I am not making that up.
No, you aren't.
To be called the Crybabies is quite something. And there is a cool story behind that. And it begins with a guy who so many, I'm sure, don't recall, don't know, and his name is Ossie Vitt. Who was Ossie Vitt?
Ossie Vitt was the manager of the 1940 Cleveland Indians. He had been a major league player, basically a bit player, a bench player from 1912 until 1921. Began a minor league managing career in 1925. Most of that time was spent in Hollywood, California, with the Hollywood Stars of the Pacific Coast League. Vitt did so well managing the Stars that by the mid-1930s, he had been hired by the New York Yankees to manage their highest minor league affiliate. I'm not sure if I would be accurate in calling it AAA, because I know minor leagues were designated differently in that era. The Newark Bears of the International League. So the Yankees had their highest rated farmhands right next door in Newark and ready to be summoned to Yankee Stadium if they were needed. And the Yankees were not about to trust their prized farmhands, the guys that they were counting on to keep the dynasty going, to just any old manager. And Vitt had earned the confidence of George Weiss, the general manager of the Yankees, and was hired to manage the Newark Bears. And the 1937 Newark Bears are considered by many to be the best minor league team ever. They won the Little World Series. They ran roughshod over the International League, won 109 games.
Wow.
Every player on the Newark Bears, with one exception, eventually played in the major leagues, either for the Yankees or for some other team. The Bears then pulled off something that had never been done in the major leagues before and wouldn't be done until 2004, when the Red Sox did it in the Little World Series against the Columbus Redbirds, the St. Louis Cardinals' top minor league affiliate. The Redbirds won the first 3 games of the best of 7, and it looked like it was curtains for the Bears, who then won the next 4 games and won the Little World Series. That, of course, got people's attention, especially the attention of the guys who owned the Cleveland Indians, who happened to be looking for a manager. So in a nutshell, that is the story of Oscar Vitt prior to his becoming the manager of the Indians.
What kind of a ball player was he? Like you said, he played from 1912 until what was it, 1912 until
21, I believe.
1921. Played with the Tigers and the Red Sox. And I think at one time, Ty Cobb actually called him one of the most intelligent ball players he had ever come across. Tell us about Ossie Vitt, the ball player.
Well, Vitt needed to be an intelligent player to stay in the major leagues. Now, one thing the Cleveland writers got a big chuckle out of, and I think Vitt did the same thing, was he loved to brag about old Oz could really hit that ball. Well, old Oz could not hit that ball. I don't have the statistics here in front of me, but his career batting average was somewhere in the vicinity of 225 to
Yeah,
230.
he was. I got it right here for you, Gary. His career batting average 238. He played for 10 years. Wasn't a small sample. I mean, he averaged over 100 games a year. He played 1,065 games. Had 3,760 at bats, so he played a great deal. Over the course of those 3,760 at bats, he hit all of 4 home runs.
4 homers.
Knocked in 296 runs, had a career average of 238, struck out. Actually, the strikeouts, when you consider today, he only struck out 143 times. There's guys that strike out 143 times in a week, it seems like.
And in a season, certainly.
Yeah, but he he was a marginal ball player, at least at the plate at best.
Well, in order to have lasted as long in the major leagues as he did, obviously, as Cobb pointed out, Vitt had to be an intelligent player. He had to be the kind of guy who did the little things well. And he earned the respect of most. If Ty Cobb says something like that about you, then that is significant because Cobb did not throw compliments around. And for him to say Vitt wasn't such an intelligent ball player was definitely a feather in Ossie's cap. So he, like so many men who become managers, who was just a marginal player and needed to do the little things and needed to do the smart things in order to stick around as long as he did, and then put that knowledge to use in the dugout, calling the shots.
How did his style of play? I think he might have been, well, when you consider the kind of manager he was, he must have had taken something from the fierce way that Ty Cobb played the game. How did Cobb's fierceness and Cobb's hustle in shape Vitt's career as a manager?
Well, Vitt had apparently a unique way of getting from his players the kind of hustle they wanted. In fact, after he was hired by the Indians, the Cleveland Plain Dealer dispatched one of their feature reporters to talk to some of the players who had played for Vitt in the minor leagues. And one of them, a guy by the name of Steve Sundra, who had played, interestingly, for both Steve O'Neill, the manager that Vitt replaced in Cleveland, and also played for Vitt with the Bears. And Sundra was then with the Yankees, one of the anchors of their pitching staff, and was asked, how did Vitt get the kind of hustle out of the Newark players that ownership of the Indians is expecting him to get out of their players? And Sundra's answer was, this guy is so smart that he can, the term that they used was stick the needle in you. How is Vitt going to stick the needle into these guys to get them to perform up to their maximum capacity? And Sundra said Vitt was such a good psychologist that he could stick the needle in you without you even realizing it and get you to pick it up a notch, and you didn't even realize you were doing it. You didn't even realize you were being asked to do it. But I guess in a maybe more contemporary terminology, Vitt seemed to know which buttons to push to get the best performance out of his players. And I'm sure that was simply learned and acquired through all those years of managing in the minor leagues.
Yeah. So why did the Indians decide to replace O'Neill and call upon Vitt?
Well, it was kind of a common thing to do. We hear about it a great deal nowadays when a team changes managers or changes coaches. You go from one, for lack of a better term, one extreme to another. And O'Neill had been what we would probably call today a player's manager. Now, as tough as O'Neill was as a player, and he was still at this time revered in Cleveland because fans remembered O'Neill as the starting catcher for the 1920 world champion Indians. He was as tough a player as you were ever going to come across, but his management style was quite laid back. In fact, in 1937, O'Neill's last year as a manager, the Indians, I should say last year as manager of the Indians, he then went on to become a very successful major league manager. In fact,
In 1930, you mean 1937 was the last year in the
his last year with the Indians. Yeah, I didn't mean to misspeak and say his last year as a manager because O'Neill went on to manage the Tigers and manage the Red Sox and manage the Phillies.
Yeah.
But his last year as manager of the Indians, which was 1937, the team was going poorly. And the editors of the Cleveland Press, which of the three daily newspapers in Cleveland at that time was the more sensationalistic of the three newspapers, the Press was highly opinionated and was not reluctant or reticent to express those opinions. With the Indians going bad at one point in the season, the Press had a full-page headline with screaming headlines that said, "Get mad, Steve!" because that was just not O'Neill's style to rant and to rave. The fans felt, and I believe the owners felt as well, the Indians had the talent to do better than they were doing. O'Neill did not seem to be the right manager to bring out that talent. He did not stick the needle into the players, which is what the fans wanted, which is what the media wanted, which is what the front office wanted. And so, as so often happens in such a situation, you go from a player's manager to a guy who cracks the whip, who rants and raves. Not that Vitt had acquired that kind of reputation in the minor leagues. He was not known to be an overbearing ogre to work for, but you looked at the man's record. When he was given talent, he won with it, and ownership just came to the conclusion based on a number of interviews with people who should have known, people who knew Vitt, that here was a guy who, as I said, knew how to push the buttons, knew how to stick the needle into the players, and would get them performing to the best of their ability. The ownership simply felt that we've got more talent than a team that O'Neill's last team finished 80-74. The year before that, 83-71. As I pointed out in the book, the Indians throughout the 1930s were a good team, but not a great team. They were good enough to finish above 500 and maybe 15 to 18 games out of first place. But they were not the St. Louis Browns by any means, but they were not the Yankees either.
Well, and that's really interesting because they did make the change. It went from O'Neill to Vitt, and you just talked about the kind of record that the Indians had in the O'Neill years. And while the Indians did see marginal improvement, I'll call it, with Vitt at the helm. It's not like they took off and became a juggernaut first place team. I mean, Vitt was there for 3 years, 38, 39, and 40, and they won 86, 87, and 89 games. Now, interestingly enough, they improved their win total every year, 86, 87, 89, but they were never able to overcome and finish in first. So there was improvement, but as we are going to find out shortly, that improvement came at a price. I mean, in a way, which is why the Indians got the name during that period, the Crybabies. How did the Indian players initially respond to Vitt's leadership style?
Well, let's take this year by year. Let's go incrementally. And as you said, there was incremental improvement each year. I mean, overall, it was like a total of 3 games improvement for the 3 years total. The first year, and this was something the Indians had made a habit of doing in the 1930s, it looked like hiring Vitt was a stroke of genius. They broke from the gate quickly. They were in first place until I believe it was late in June or early in July. And then I can't say they hit the skids because they didn't, but they went from being 18 games over 500 to, over the last 86 games of the season, they were 2 games over 500. So they did not collapse, but maybe they just regressed to the mean and became the kind of team that they were supposed to be over the last roughly a little more than half of the season, winding up in 3rd place, an improvement over 37 and O'Neill's last year, but only a marginal improvement. Now, when Vitt was hired, he was signed to a 2-year contract. Nowadays, of course, it is news if a manager isn't given a multi-year contract. I think Walt Weiss was the last guy to not get a multi-year contract with Colorado many, many years ago, and that made headlines itself. You can't sign a guy for 1 year. He's a lame duck before he even reports to spring training. But in the 1930s, multi-year contracts for managers were not normal. I mean, everybody did what Walter Alston did.
1 year, what,
24
years, 1 year
yes,
contract every year of his
24 one-year contracts. Vitt was signed for 2 years, which was a show of confidence on the part of the management. So in 1938, the Indians did the opposite of what they had done in 1937 and what they had done both full seasons that Steve O'Neill was manager. O'Neill took over in the middle of the 1935 season. The Indians spurted after that, which created a false sense of optimism that things are going to be great come 1936, and it didn't work out that way. And in 1937, things didn't work out the way management had expected. In 1937, the Indians got off to a very slow start, were well below 500 before they finally caught fire and marched over the American League in August and September, after they were trailing the Yankees by 20-some games, and it didn't matter anymore. The 38 Indians under Oscar Vitt did the same thing. They started off slowly. They worked their way up to 500 and a little bit beyond. They were only 4 games over 500 in early August, and then they caught fire and wound up finishing 3rd at 87 and 67. So either the Indians started off quickly and then faded, or they started off slowly and caught fire when the race was over and the Yankees had won. So Vitt technically really had not improved upon what O'Neill had done in the first 2 years that he was manager. Improved the record, yes, but the Indians were still left choking on the dust of the Yankees. But in 1938, Vitt was signed for, 1939. 1939, Vitt was signed for another year. The Indians did not want him to be twisting in the wind. They didn't want him to be a lame duck the last 2 months of the 39 season. There were rumors going around that Vitt was finished when the season was over, or maybe before he was going to be dismissed. So the team owner, Alva Bradley, decided to put that to rest early in August of 1939 and signed Vitt for 1940. The seeds of what happened in 1940, truthfully, they could go all the way back to 1938. Vitt had his problems with some of his players from the very beginning.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. I mean, were there early signs of friction?
There were, most notably with an outfielder by the name of Jeff Heath, who was just noted for being a hothead. Heath and Vitt clashed almost immediately and never really worked things out, never really were able to get along together. And whether or not that played a role in Heath's numbers drastically declining, because in 1938, Heath, I believe, hit 343. In 1939, that went down, I think, to around 295. And in 1940, Heath hit, if I'm not mistaken, 219.
Yeah, here it is. He in 36, well, 36 was when he came up. So his first full year was 38, and he hit 343. And then 292, and then 219 in 41 after Vitt was gone, it went back up to 340.
So whether or not that had to do with his problems with Vitt or not, who is to say? But that is the most notable example of friction between Vitt and one of his players. When he was rehired for 1940, this would have been in August of 1939, and that in and of itself is really an interesting story that I'm sure we will cover a little later on. But when Vitt was rehired for 1940, Alva Bradley, the president of the team, one of the co-owners, said, the players need to know who is in charge. And now they know. Vitt will be back and be in charge next year. And there is a really interesting story that goes along with that. And I would imagine we will get to that a little later, but I do explain that in some detail in the final chapter of the book.
Well, let's almost get to what's keeping everybody in suspense here. You just addressed that, there were issues with a couple of players, we'll say. He had somewhat of an abrasive tone, especially if you compare it to what O'Neill was prior. Before the controversy really came about, did the front office, team ownership, players, did anyone ever express any concern about Vitt's management style, his approach to the game before the revolt of 1940?
Well, that's something that I was looking for specifically when I did my research. Whether or not there were any undertones, whether or not there was any reason to believe prior to June of 1940 when the whole thing exploded, if this was bubbling under at any point. I didn't detect anything in the research I did from 1939, although when Vitt was rehired, he was asked about rumors that he didn't get along with some of his players. And he conceded, I have had problems with some of these guys, but I'm in charge here, and they're just going to have to do things my way. And that was the end of that discussion. Nobody specifically was discussed, but Vitt was obviously aware of it. I think management was aware of it. And they put their money where their mouth was and said, Vitt's in charge. So those of you who are not happy with this, too bad. You're going to have to live with it. This is a different era of sports.
Gary, can you explain some of the things that he did that upset the players, that they maybe considered were out of line? Like what was it just the way he spoke to them? What were the things that he did, if you can enlighten us?
Largely, it was verbal. And I go into a lot of detail about this in the book, but it was largely verbal. In fact, when Vitt was hired, one of the jokes among the Cleveland media was he never met a microphone or a pad and a pencil he didn't like. He loved to talk, to the extent that Bradley once told him, Oscar, you talk too much and it's gonna get you in trouble. And eventually it did. When the rebellion took place on June 13th of 1940, all of Cleveland's newspapers printed a laundry list of the complaints that were made by the players to Bradley. Most of the things they complained about were verbal abuse. There is one famous story here in Cleveland. The legend goes, and I was able to confirm this through my research, although the exact quote I couldn't nail down. There were two different versions of the most incendiary of quotes. But what eventually pushed the players over the edge, the straw that broke the camel's back? In, I think it was like June 10th or 11th, the Indians were wrapping up a road trip in Boston. And Bob Feller was pitching. Feller at this time was 21 years old and already the best pitcher in the American League. Led the league in almost every category of 1940, won 27 games, pitched in relief in addition to starting. In this game at Fenway Park, Feller was pitching with bruised ribs. Everything that I have learned from my research indicated that Vitt knew Feller was pitching hurt, but he was out there anyway, giving it his best effort, and it wasn't good enough. The Red Sox were knocking him all over the park, and supposedly Vitt said to no one in particular. I mean, many of his comments were just made to no one in particular. He was standing there in the dugout talking to himself, but the players heard it. And certainly he knew the players were going to hear it. So Feller is out there pitching with bruised ribs and getting knocked around by the Red Sox. And Vitt says to no one in particular, there he is. There is my star, the great Feller. I'm supposed to win a pennant with him. And that was the quote that pushed the players over the edge, and they decided this guy has got to go, because as young as he was, Feller had a lot of respect among his teammates. They knew he was out there hurt and giving it his best shot, and on this day, it just wasn't good enough. And instead of Vitt being sympathetic and being grateful that my star pitcher is out there giving me the best he's got when I know he's hurt, instead he's criticizing this guy. I can't win a pennant with this guy. And that was more than they could take. There had also been an incident in that same game. I think it was the same game, might have been the game before. Mel Harder
Well, that's where I was going next.
Yes,
Tell
Mel
me
Harder.
about Mel Harder, because I think that's what really ignited all the anger.
And it very well could have been, because Harder was a respected veteran. He'd been with the Indians since 1928. He had won 15 games for, I forget exactly how many consecutive seasons. I think like every year since 1932, he had won at least 15 games. He had suffered an arm injury the year before, was brought along slowly in spring training. In fact, to listen to Vitt's comments, to read Vitt's comments during spring training, he certainly didn't sound like the ogre, the monster that the player made him out to be, because throughout spring training, it was like Mel is going to set his own agenda. Mel is going to decide when he pitches. I'm not going to send him out there unless he says he's ready to pitch, and he will come back in his own good time when he's ready, being shown the respect that a veteran such as Harder had earned. But in this series in Fenway Park, Harder had been knocked around, and when he came back to the dugout, Vitt allegedly said something to the effect that it's about time you start earning that big salary you're getting paid. And Harder just looked at him and said, I'm giving you the best I have. And for him to attack a respected veteran like Harder, that may have been the inciting incident rather than put those two together. He attacks Harder, he attacks Feller, and the players have had enough at that point.
Yeah, Harder, by the way, in 32, starting in 1932, 15 and 13, 15 and 17, 20 and 12, 22 and 11, 15 and 15, 15 and 12, 17 and 10, 15 and 9. So yeah, he was as consistent and as good as you can expect. So how did the team respond to the Feller incident and the Harder incident? And what was it about these two particular incidents that finally, as you said, broke the straw that broke the camel's back? And they said, that's it. We've had it. We're going to management and we're getting you fired.
Well, again, I think, as I said, it was because of the stature of the two players being attacked and Harder coming off an arm injury. Obviously, the techniques for treating arm injuries in 1939 and 1940 were not as sophisticated as they are today. So your star player and your highly respected veteran, you have just embarrassed both of them. Well, he didn't embarrass Feller in front of the rest of the team because Feller is out there on the mound and can't hear this, but Harder, to his face, has just been embarrassed. Maybe even accused of, maybe Harder took it to mean, you're not trying. You're not giving me the best you got. You can do better than this. The stature of the two people that are being denigrated here, I mean, if Vitt is going to say these things about these guys, he's going to say anything about anybody. And that was another of the complaints against him. Notice that he's making this derogatory comment about Feller, with Feller well out of earshot. The players insisted that this had been a pattern of behavior since Vitt took over. What he said to their face and what he said behind their backs were often two very different things, and word eventually got back to them when he was insulting them, denigrating them behind their backs.
How much influence do you think his playing days, I think I asked this before, with Ty Cobb affected his demeanor? In other words, were there any generational differences at play here? I mean, Vitt played in the dead ball era with one of baseball's fiercest competitors, a guy who would do anything and everything possible to win a game in Ty Cobb. And these players he's now managing, I don't know how many players over the course of history had that same spirit as Ty Cobb did. How much did that play a role in how Vitt's demeanor as a manager?
Well, you have to consider how many years they were teammates. Certainly, some of Cobb's demeanor must have rubbed off on Vitt. Consider the fact that Cobb could have stayed in the game simply based on his sheer talent. Now, he drove himself to be as great as he was. Maybe if he hadn't driven himself, he would have had a 330 lifetime batting average instead of 367. Cobb could stay in the game on sheer talent, but that wasn't enough. He drove himself to be the absolute best that he could be. Vitt was probably not able to stay in the game, or at least he couldn't advance any further than he did on his sheer talent, but he watched Cobb and he saw what Cobb was able to do through sheer force of will. And as a manager, I would think he probably remembered that and figured, I can get my guys to do better than they're doing if I can make them achieve the focus that Cobb had. How do I make them do that? I'm thinking that might have been some influence on his managerial style. And everybody is going to respond differently to that kind of provocation, for lack of a better word, or that kind of inspiration. Some players are going to run through a brick wall for you, and some players are going to go into a shell and you'll never get them out.
How did the press react to all this as this is going on? I mean, did Vitt make comments in the press to fuel the fire even more? Did players make comments? How did all that work?
Well, I researched 1939 and 1940. I didn't find any comments in any of the Cleveland papers from Vitt denigrating any of his players. He did not do this in the press. And of course, the press was basically the media of the time. Radio certainly existed. And I would have no way of knowing what Vitt might have said. As I mentioned earlier, he never met a microphone he didn't like. So what he may have said to radio, I don't know. But in the newspapers, as I'm doing this research, I'm kind of scratching my head and thinking, wow, what this guy is saying just doesn't seem to jive with what eventually happened. As I mentioned during spring training, he's talking about how Harder can set his own agenda. And in spring training, Vitt said, my problem with Feller is he works too hard. I can't get him to cut back. He wants to throw every day. He wants to exercise every day. I can't get this kid to cut back. The things that he was saying, he talked about, not mentioning any names, but he talked about a certain player that he was certain had a change of heart over the off season and was going to come into camp with a new attitude. Well, everybody knew that was Jeff Heath. So he's not putting these guys down in the press. He's talking them up in the press, which I guess was another one of the players' problems. He talks us up to the media, but behind our backs, he knifes us. That was another one of their complaints.
So the incident with Feller, the incident with Harder, they've had enough. They want him out of there, and they go see the team owner, Alva Bradley, and the GM, Cy Slapnica or something.
Yes.
Like that. Tell us about that meeting.
Well, a few days before that meeting, Hal Trotsky, who was the team's first baseman, an unfortunate fellow because he was forced to leave the game due to migraine headaches. Here was a guy who was on the pace for a Hall of Fame. You look at his numbers in the mid and late 30s, and if this guy had continued to produce at that pace, he was going to the Hall of Fame.
Well, I did a show on Hal a while back, and you're right. I mean, Hal Trotsky had one heck of a career. And if it wasn't for guys like Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, we all might know a little bit more about Hal Trotsky.
We might. And if he hadn't played in Cleveland or had played in a bigger market like New York or Chicago, we might have heard a lot more about him. Now, Trotsky has, through the years, gained, and even in 1940, had the reputation of being the ringleader of this revolt. He said, no, I wasn't. I was vocal, but I didn't do any more or say any more than anybody else did. But this thing seems to have been pinned on me. But a couple of nights before the revolt, probably this would have been after the Harder incident with the Indians in Boston, Trotsky met with Frank Gibbons, who was the baseball writer for the Cleveland Press, and said, hey, let's go to the bar and have a drink. I want to have a chat with you. And in the bar, Trotsky said, when we get back home, we're going to go to Mr. Bradley and we're going to tell him we want Vitt out. We can't stand playing for him anymore. And Gibbons, and I mentioned this in the book, I don't know if it's to his credit or not. I think it probably is. Gibbons had just been handed the greatest scoop of his sports writing career. Trotsky had just told him, we're going to rebel. We're going to demand that Vitt be fired. And instead of that showing up on the front page of the Cleveland Press the next day, Gibbons, to his credit, I suppose, tried to be the voice of reason and said, look, Hal, you better think about this some more. I'm not sure you realize the ramifications of what you are planning to do, but you really better think about this a little more. And Trotsky said, okay, we will think about it. And then came the Feller incident, and there was no more thinking about it. But the players, or Trotsky, had been warned by Gibbons, you may not realize what you're doing here. Nothing like this has ever been done before. And you better fully realize the can of worms that you're opening up, the hornet's nest that you are going to be walking into. When the players met with Bradley, he told them, I really wish you would have thought about this a little more. I don't think you realize, again, the can of worms that you're opening up, but this is going to affect you for the rest of your career. This is going to get out. You want to keep the lid on this, but it's not going to happen. And of course, how could they keep the lid on it? They told Gibbons.
Yeah, sure.
They couldn't keep the lid on it. You don't realize that this is going to affect you for the rest of your career. The fans will never let you forget this.
And this is where we're heading. We're heading towards the name of your book, that encompasses the word crybabies. When they met with Bradley, what were they demanding? Were they demanding Bradley and Slapnicka? You got to talk to Vitt and tell him to back off, or were they saying you got to get rid of this guy?
Well, first of all, Slapnicka was not involved in this meeting.
Okay.
And Slapnicka, who had been in Vitt's corner when he was originally hired by 1940, he disliked Slapnicka. He disliked Vitt as much as the players did. In fact, I even note in the final chapter of the book that there is some reason to believe Slapnicka goaded the players into meeting with Bradley.
Oh, interesting.
Which would give him, as general manager, either an opportunity to fire Vitt, or at least encourage Bradley to fire Vitt. That's never been proven, but there are some who believe Slapnicka was really the guy behind this. He wanted to fire Vitt, and this would give him the reason to do so. Bradley would let him fire Vitt if the players went to Bradley and said, the guy's got to go. So that was what they did. They laid their cards on the table. They said, we can't play winning baseball for this man. We demand, at least that was what the newspapers said, we demand that you fire him immediately.
So we know how Bradley responded by saying, you guys should have thought about this before coming to me. You should have talked more about this. How did Vitt react when he learned of the meeting? How did Vitt react in the dugout? Did he just stay the same? Did he alter his managerial style to be more, I don't know, player friendly? Or did he get even tougher on the players?
That was something I was really looking forward to finding out. How do you respond to a situation like this? As noted earlier, when he was rehired, he acknowledged some of these guys don't like me, but that's too bad. I'm the boss and I'm calling the shots and they'll do things my way. So it's not as if this completely blindsided him. It couldn't have. In fact, how he found out about it was really quite interesting. June 13th was a Thursday. It was supposed to be an off day, but the Indians had a whole bunch of rainouts in the first 2 months of the season. So the Tigers were in town for a makeup game at League Park on June 13th in the afternoon. The players met with Bradley in the morning. Vitt managed the game that afternoon, having no knowledge that the players had talked to Bradley.
Wow.
After the game, a reporter, I don't identify the reporter in the book because I don't know who it was. The reporter was not identified. But after the game, a reporter went to Vitt and said, well, Ossie, what do you have to say about what happened this morning? And Vitt had no idea what he was talking about. The reporter then filled Vitt in on the meeting with Bradley. So Vitt calls Bradley, who had not spoken to him at that point. And Bradley admits, yeah, the players talked to me. I was going to talk to you about it tomorrow, but I wanted to take this evening to consider what I was going to say and how I was going to present this to you. But you found out, so yes, the players came to me today and demanded that you be fired. So come to my office tomorrow and we'll talk about it. Vitt went to Bradley's office the next day. They met for about an hour, and the press was, of course, waiting outside Bradley's door for possibly the announcement that Vitt had been fired, or possibly the announcement that Vitt had resigned. And Vitt came out and said simply, I'm still the manager. Let's play ball. That was the immediate reaction. But of course, Vitt elaborated later on in the day and professed to disbelief. I can't believe they've done this. I'm on good terms with everybody on this team. How could they do this to me? That's what he said for public consumption. Maybe in his heart of hearts, he wasn't all that surprised. But for public consumption, he insisted, I've done nothing to deserve this. I don't know how this happened. I don't know why they're doing this to me.
Wow. So now the name Crybabies. All this happens. Indians, again, are not the worst team in baseball. They're a competitive team. So he must be doing something right. The players must be doing something right. Even though there's a revolt, nobody wants to lose. How does the label Crybabies befall upon the team? Was it media driven? Did someone in ownership come out and say, these are just a bunch of crybabies? How does the name Crybabies come about?
Well, ownership was, I think, extremely tolerant. Essentially, ownership was Alva Bradley. Now, he was one of many co-owners. I don't remember off the top of my head exactly how many co-owners the Indians had. They were a group called the Millionaires, and
Oh,
they had owned the team since 1927. But essentially, um, Alva Bradley spoke for everybody. Nobody went to the other millionaires and asked for their opinion, or if they did, no one had an opinion to offer. Alva Bradley spoke for the millionaires and was very tolerant, I think, under the conditions. He didn't denigrate the players. He could have told them, get the heck out of my office. You play, I'll own, Vitt will manage. He could have told them that, but he didn't. He listened to their complaints. He said he would look into, investigate the complaints, but for the time being, we are going to maintain the status quo. Vitt remains the manager. I expect you to do your jobs and play the best you can for him. And interestingly enough, after this happened, the Indians went on an extended hot streak.
I was just going to ask you, how did all this affect the team?
The team caught fire after this. They went on an extended hot streak. They were at home. They were just beginning a homestand, which probably helped, although the home fans for most of the season sided with Vitt. They took Vitt's side in the battle with the players, and Vitt was always grateful for that. The players, some of them, Trotsky in particular. Trotsky got booed every time he came to home plate. Now, Trotsky was not even in attendance at this meeting. I mean, the poor guy didn't have enough trouble. He gets a phone call that his mother in Iowa has passed away.
Mm.
So he prepares to leave right away for Iowa to make the funeral arrangements. But he calls Bradley's office while he knows this meeting is going on. And he knows what the players are telling Bradley. And he said, Mr. Bradley, I want you to know, I agree with everything you are hearing. But the poor guy's mother passes away during all this turmoil. When he gets back, the fans boo him. The home fans boo him every time he comes to the plate. It's hard for us to understand, I think, what this must have been like for the fans, because even in that day and age, when the players didn't make the kind of money they do now, but they still made a lot more than your average worker makes, and they're making it playing a game for a living, and people who are paying good money to go to the ballpark to see these guys are thinking to themselves, I don't particularly care for my boss either, but I can't walk into ownership and tell them fire this guy. So who do they think they are? That seems to be the general attitude of the fans. Who do these guys think they are? They're playing a game for a living and making a lot more than the average person, and they're not happy. Isn't that too bad?
Everything we still say today.
Yes, to a large extent. It was hard for the fans to sympathize with the players. And if I had been a fan back in 1940, I think I might well have felt pretty much the same way.
Well, so again, where does the name Crybabies come from?
Well, simply because, I mean, what did they do? If you don't like
But who
what the
labeled
Indians,
them? Who labeled them? Was it the press labeled them? They said, oh, these guys went to meet and they are just a bunch of crybabies.
the out of town press did. The
Ah.
Cleveland media didn't, but the out of town press right away. Well, these guys are a bunch of crybabies. They don't like the way things are, so they run to mommy and they cry. So they became the Cleveland Crybabies. That was where the name came from. The out of town press. They were not labeled as crybabies by management, and they really weren't labeled as crybabies by the local press. Now the fans may have, but the press, the plain dealer, the Cleveland News, they never referred to the players as crybabies.
You know what's interesting, Gary, is that let's just go through this and be as accurate as we can. In 1937, with Steve O'Neill still as the manager, the Indians finish in fourth place, 83-71, 19 games out of first place. In 1938, Vitt's first season as manager, they finished in third, 86-66, 13 games out of first place. In 1939, they improved by a game, but they finished 20 and a half games out of first place. The Yankees win the league again, 106 wins. Cleveland, 87 wins. In 1940, all this takes place. The Indians are in a pennant race. The Indians finished the season one game back, with them into shape, has them on the tail of the Tigers. The Tigers win the league, the American League, 90 wins to the Indians, 89 wins, one game back. What say you?
Well, if you'll allow me to go off on a bit of a tangent, if I may, to kind of set the scene for what we are discussing. One of the reasons that I was fascinated by the 1940 season is because the first book that I remember might have been even the first baseball book I ever read. It was called The Cleveland Indians, and it was written by a guy by the name of Franklin Lewis, who was the sports editor of the Cleveland Press. It was written after the World Series championship of 1948. In this book, Lewis talks about the 1940 season. There is a chapter dedicated to the Crybaby Rebellion. And in this book, Lewis stated, and this never made any sense to me, and it makes even less sense now that I have researched it thoroughly. According to Lewis, the Indians were the heavy favorites to win the American League pennant in 1940. That didn't make any sense to me even way back then before I got into the history of the sport. It makes even less sense now. As you just said, the Yankees in 1939 were a juggernaut. They won 106 games. They swept Cincinnati in the World Series. It was their fourth consecutive World Championship. They returned the entire team intact for 1940. Other than being a year older, which I think did kind of play a part on their pitching staff in 1940, but other than the fact that they're all a year older, the Yankees have not changed at all from the team that won 106 games.
Yeah, and you're not going to win 106 games 2 years in a row. It's like almost impossible. And it's not like the Yankees had an awful season in 1940 either. They still won.
No, they didn't, but why would the national media decide that the Indians, who finished 20 and a half games out of first place in 1939 and really did not do anything to improve the roster, with the exception of the second baseman Ray Mack and the shortstop Lou Boudreau, who greatly solidified the infield, but they had come up midway through 1939 and had been part of the spark that led the Indians to play so well in August and September of 39. But other than their addition, it's the same Indians ball club that finished 20 and a half games out in 39. Why would the national press think the Indians were going to win the 1940 pennant? And in doing this research, they didn't. I don't know where Franklin Lewis got his information, but none of the Cleveland writers picked the Indians to win the pennant in 1940. None of the national writers picked the Indians to win the pennant in 1940. I don't know where Lewis got his information, but it's completely faulty information. And the Yankees, if they had played up to their usual standards, okay, they don't have to win 106 games like they did in 1939. If they win 95, 96, which is pretty much par for the course for the Yankees of that era. if they just have a typical Yankees season, they leave the Indians and the Tigers choking on their dust. There is no pennant race in 1940 if the Yankees are simply the Yankees, but they got off to a terrible start. And basically the rest of the way, they got hot, then they got cold, then they got hot, then they got cold, and they still finished only 2 games out of first place. So the Indians were not the favorites to win the pennant in 1940. They were considered to be maybe a second place team, more likely a third place team. But the Yankees chose 1940 to have an off year, and the Indians and Tigers were able to take advantage of it. And to your point, I do point that out at the end of the Crybabies book, that the bottom line is, no matter how the players felt about Ossie Vitt, the bottom line was he almost did the job that he was hired to do. He got them within 1 game of the pennant, regardless of how the players felt about him. 1 game of the pennant, which O'Neill couldn't do, which Walter Johnson couldn't do before O'Neill, which Roger Peckinpah couldn't do before Johnson. Vitt somehow did it under really adverse conditions.
So they finished a game out of first place. There was this player revolt. Bradley supported Vitt. The team goes on a hot streak, right? They go on a hot streak to stay in the pennant race. They almost catch the Tigers. And that's it for Vitt. After 1940, he was gone.
Well, he was. And there are some interesting things that I think need to be mentioned. First of all, it's just a tiny bit misleading when we point out that the Indians finished the game out of first. Yes, they did, but here was the situation. In late August, the Indians had a 5.5 game lead in the American League. In fact, on the train, after they had finished beating Boston and headed down south to New York, the players are celebrating. We're 5.5 games up. One of the players is running around the train saying, "They can't catch us. They can't catch us." It was like they had clinched the pennant that day. All they had to do was play 1 game over 500 for the rest of the season, the way things played out, and that would have been good enough for the pennant. But they played 1 game under 500 for the rest of the season.
Okay.
They were 25 games over at that point, 71 and 46. The rest of the way, they went 18 and 19, and that was enough for the Tigers to catch them and pass them. So, first of all, in September, there was a second rebellion. And what happened in September? The players, they were in Detroit. They decided Vitt just doesn't know how to manage this team. Vitt is managing this team like it was his Newark Bears, where everybody could hit the ball out of the ballpark. We don't have that kind of team. Interesting, the discussion that we had earlier about Vitt's managing style, and was it Ty Cobb's old-fashioned dead ball style. The players said, that's the style we need to play. We need to bunt and hit and run because we don't have the power that the Tigers and the Yankees have. But Vitt is playing what would like become known as Earl Weaver ball, 3-run homers, pitching and 3-run homers.
Going way back, did Vitt approach the Newark Bears in the same manner that he approached the Cleveland Indians, managerial style?
Well, here is one thing that really drove the players crazy. Vitt was always making reference to his 1937 minor league champion Newark Bears. And it was always in a derogatory, my Bears could do this and my ball club now can't. And my Bears could do this, but the Indians can't. My Bears could do this, but this ball club can't. And they got tired of hearing that. So that was part of what they were complaining about. He can't seem to make the adjustment to a team that doesn't. We had Hal Trotsky and Ken Keltner, essentially, the two guys who could hit the ball out of the ballpark. That was it. And Vitt was playing for the long ball and the power game. And the players said, we can't do it this way. So here's what we're going to do. We have devised our own set of signals, and we're going to play the game our way. If we don't like what Vitt wants us to do, we're going to ignore him. And they were as blatant about this as they could possibly be. On this night in early September, in a hotel in Detroit, they held a players-only meeting at which they decided, we will do things our way from now on. We're going to ignore Vitt and do things our way. After the meeting, Vitt was in the hotel dining room. Obviously, he knew nothing about this meeting. And also in the hotel dining room was Gordon Cobbledick, who was the Plain Dealer beat writer and eventually became the sports editor and is now in the writer's wing of the Baseball Hall of Fame. So one of the players walks up to Cobbledick, and in a voice loud enough that Vitt could hear, the player said, hey, Cobby, I want to tell you what just happened. We just had this meeting, and we just decided that we're doing things our way from now on. We don't care what Vitt wants. We're calling the shots from now on. And he made sure Vitt heard it. That's how blatant they were with their second rebellion. So, I mean, what does a guy do in a situation like this when he knows his players are now ignoring him? What do you do? And still, they chased the Tigers all the way. Now, the reason I say it's a little misleading that they finished the game out of first place, yes, they did, but the situation was coming into the last 3 games of the season, which would be played at Old Municipal Stadium, the Tigers had a 2-game lead with 3 games to play. The Indians had to sweep that series in order to finish 1 game ahead. Now, the first game of that series on a Friday afternoon was a game that people still talk about here in Cleveland. I'm sure you'll recognize this name. It was the Floyd-Giebel game. And what happened was Del Baker, the manager of the Tigers, met with his team before the opener of this series and said, look, guys, this is all of our money here, mine as much as yours. Here's what I want to do. The Tigers had 2 ace pitchers. They had Dizzy Trout and Bobo or Buck Newsom, depending on which nickname you prefer to use. The Indians had Bob Feller. Feller was finally going to be pitching on full rest. He had pitched not only as a starter, but as a reliever through much of September and was exhausted. But Feller was going to be pitching on full rest. And Baker said, the Indians have to sweep this series in order to win the pennant. We only need 1 game. They have to lead with their ace. They have to start Feller. They have no choice. They have to start Feller. If Feller is on top of his game, don't mean to be negative, but if Feller is on top of his game, we will probably lose the first game. But then Vitt will have played his ace, and he's got nothing left. I still have Trout and Newsom to pitch the second and the third games of this series should we lose to Feller. If we win, great. But if we don't, I've got Trout and Newsom, and Vitt has to pitch his second liners because he's used his ace. I'm going to start Floyd-Giebel, who had just been called up from the minor leagues a couple of weeks before. If it's okay with you guys, this is your money that we're messing around with, but I think this is the strategy to use. And the players backed him. The players said, yeah, let's do it that way. So there are 46,000 people in Municipal Stadium. Feller pitches a 3-hitter. He gives up a 2-run homer to Rudy York. Giebel pitches a shutout.
Yeah,
Tigers
Floyd
win.
Giebel pitched 2 games that year, both complete games. One game was a shutout.
Yes, and it was a shutout of the Indians. Tigers clinched the pennant. So the next day and the day after, the games mean nothing to the Tigers, and the Indians win them both to finish 1 game behind. But that's why 1 game behind is a tiny bit misleading, because after losing on Friday, they were 3 games behind with 2 games to play. But I mean, still close. It's still down to the wire.
So in the end, Vitt loses his job after the season. Bradley really didn't have much of a choice, did he?
I don't think so. Bradley was in a tough position all the way through. I mean, he had first of all made his statement, and I explained this. I didn't know this myself until I did the research for the book, and this story absolutely fascinated me. I would never have seen this coming. But according to Gordon Cobbledick, the rebellion was supposed to have taken place in September August of 1939. The players at that point were already fed up with Vitt, and they were planning to go to Bradley and demand that he be fired. And what transpired was this. The players, the Indians, were in New York figuring the Yankees are going to beat up on us, so we'll go home on a losing streak, and that'll really give us plenty of ammunition to go into Bradley and tell him Vitt's gotta go. Well, what should happen but the Indians sweep a doubleheader from the Yankees? Okay, that kind of throws a monkey wrench into the plans. How are we supposed to go to Bradley now and tell him we can't win for this guy when we just took a doubleheader on the home field of the Yankees? So we better put this on the back burner. Now, in the meantime, a New York newspaper had apparently gotten wind of what the players planned to do. And one New York newspaper, and of course there were, 20 New York newspapers, but one newspaper printed a story that said Oscar Vitt is doomed. Oscar Vitt is done as manager of the Indians. Apparently, Bradley either saw the story or got wind of it somehow and decided at this point, I'm going to nip this in the bud, if I may quote Barney Fife. I'm going to nip this in the bud. I'm going to rehire Vitt for next year. If there is a player rebellion brewing, I'm going to put a stop to it right now by signing Vitt for next year. And the Indians swept that doubleheader. It was on August 7th. Bradley rehired Vitt on August 11th. And so the rebellion didn't take place. What good is it going to do now? He's been rehired for next year. Are we going to march on Bradley's office after he hires the manager for another year and tell him, fire him anyway? Yeah. So the rebellion that was supposed to happen in August of 39 then doesn't happen until June of 40 because the conditions never do get better. In fact, they get worse. Then what are you going to do if you're Alva Bradley and your players come to you? And this is without precedent. Now, there were no doubt other instances when players didn't like the manager and sought to undercut him, but never did anybody just go right into the owner and say, fire this guy. We want him out. Nobody has ever done that. If Bradley gives in, then what kind of can of worms are you opening? Players in all sports are going, hey, look what the Indians did. They got rid of this guy they didn't like. We don't like our manager. We don't like our coach. Maybe our ownership will do the same thing. Warren, you can't have the players, you can't have the inmates running the asylum. You just can't do it. But at the same time, you can't keep this guy around after this year. Why they dragged it out, I don't know. Why they just didn't announce the day after the final game of the season, Vitt is done, especially when your players have gone to the beat writer for the Cleveland Plain Dealer and said, put this in your paper. We are ignoring Vitt from now on. You can't keep this guy as, I mean, what kind of tough guy are you trying to be if you're going to tell him, Vitt is my man and he stays? Understand that? That's not going to work.
Gary, we've been on this for a long time. We can start wrapping this up. I do need to ask this last question. That was it for Vitt. 1940. Never saw the majors again as a manager. Is that why?
Well, when he left town, he did say, I will probably retire. Unless somebody gives me a really good offer, I will probably retire. And somebody did. He was hired to manage the Portland Beavers of the Pacific Coast League at a salary of $10,000. Now, I don't know if that was a really good minor league salary for 1941, but I'm guessing it probably was. Pretty good salary for a minor league manager. But as far as the major leagues are concerned, how could any owner justify, I don't want to phrase it the way I'm going to phrase it because it's going to come out differently than I really mean it. How can any owner justify hiring Oscar Vitt?
Yeah.
I don't mean that as a slap at Vitt, but how can you go to your fan base and say, I'm going to hire this guy that they ran out of Cleveland on a rail. The players did it. I'm going to hire him to manage my team anyway. How can you do that? It just was not feasible as I see it.
Right. Yep, you're right. With all this, you can't hire too much baggage, as they would say. Crybaby Rebellion. I can't wait to read it. What a great title. I'm looking forward to reading the book. I am so happy we were finally able to do a show face to face. Gary, it's been wonderful.
Well, I'm really glad we had this Zoom meeting, Warren, and let me say that I'm very anxious to read your book. I'm looking forward to your book on the college all-star game. In fact, I was just visiting friends this evening and mentioning the fact that I was going to have this Zoom meeting and that I'm looking forward to the publication of your book because I have never been quoted in somebody else's book before.
Oh, it'll be fun.
And my friend said to me, wow, that's got to be the coolest thing, seeing your words quoted in somebody else's book. And I said, yes, I can't wait to see what things I said that Warren decided to put in his book. And not only for that reason, but I'm anxious to know a lot about the college all-star game because it was going on when I was cutting my teeth as a football fan. It went on till 1976, so I know about the college all-star game. In fact, I believe, maybe you can tell me this, I think when my Cleveland Browns won the 1964 championship, I think they lost to the college all-stars the next year.
No, they won.
Did they win?
Yeah, the last time the all-stars won a game was over Vince Lombardi's Green Bay Packers in 63, I think it was, and Vince was not happy.
And people need to understand how much more seriously players and fans and coaches took exhibition games in those days.
It was a big deal. Remember, there was a time when the NFL played 6 exhibition games a year.
Yes.
And now we're down to 3, and soon enough, it's going to be 2.
And they hardly count anyway. But yes, I can imagine Lombardi must have been climbing the walls after the Packers lost to the college all-stars. I want to read about that and all about the all-star game.
Yeah, there's a bunch of good stuff in there. I can't wait for it to come out. Gary, thank you so much for being my guest today. I can't wait till we do it again.
Warren, it's my pleasure, and I'm looking forward to it.
As a player, Vitt spent 7 years with the Detroit Tigers and 3 with the Boston Red Sox. He had a career batting average of .238 while playing all 3 outfield positions, second base and third base. He also appeared in 1 game at shortstop. His biggest contribution, though, came as a manager during his 3 seasons in Cleveland, where he won 262 games and lost 198 for a career winning percentage of .570. Not bad at all. Thanks again to my guest today, Gary Webster. Check out his new book, CRYBABY REBELLIon. You won't be disappointed. Thanks to all of you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes.
The Sports History Network, where legends live on and the past plays loud. Welcome to the place where history's proud. From gridiron glory to the hardwood stars, from the racetrack heat to Olympic bars. It's the voices, the stories, the moments you miss, told by fans and pros who live for this. Hook and Themic, the Sports History Network, where the past comes alive. Podcasts and blogs that keep the flame high. From Babe to Brady, Alley to the Dome. If it's history and sports, then this is the home. SportsHistoryNetwork.com, the headquarters of sports yesteryear.